Howdy, my fellow gamers, and welcome to another episode of Storytime with Freak. As we delve into The Toll, sorry it's been 2 weeks, I returned to work, and that's just been killing me. We've also been focusing on the gaming content, and the Twitch, all that good jazz, blah blah blah. But without further ado, let's dive right on in. There were 9,834 colonists on Mars. Even more than had lost their lives on the moon in the world's first mass gleaning. And there were extensive plans to make our sister planet a home for millions, eventually billions, but something went terribly wrong. Have you done your homework on Mars? Have you scanned the list of names of those doomed colonists? I don't expect you to remember or even recognize any of them, not even the ones who were famous at the time, because fame comes and goes, and mostly their fame is gone. But look again, because there's one name I want you to see. Carson Lusk. He was there when the disaster occurred and was lucky enough to be one of the few survivors. He was in the right place at the right time and managed to get on board the one escape vessel that wasn't incinerated when the colony's reactor blew. There was a big celebration when the small group of survivors finally made it back to Earth, but after that, Carson Lusk disappeared from public view. Or did he? Let's back up a bit to 3 months before the reactor took out the colony. If you look at the transport records for craft coming to and from Mars, you'll see a name that I'm sure you'll find familiar. Xenocrates. He was a young Scythe at the time and the only one to ever visit the Mars colony. It was controversial because it implied that Scythes would continue their business on the Red Planet. Why, people wondered, when there was an entire planet on which to expand. It would be maybe 100,000 years before a Scythe would ever be needed on Mars. He wasn't there to glean anyone, he said. He was merely entertaining his curiosity. He wanted to know what it would be like to live on Mars, and he was true to his word. He didn't glean a single person once he reached the planet. He merely took tours and spoke with the colonists. It was all very benign. I have something to show you now. What you're about to see is a video recorded of Xenocrates' arrival. Hard to recognize him, I know. He was still thin then, and his robe didn't have all the gold which when he became High Blade. As you can see, he's greeted by the governor of the colony and a few other dignitaries, and there, do you see the young man in the background? That's Carson Lusk. While Xenocrates was on Mars, Carson was assigned to be his personal valet. Not a good view of him, I know, but he'll turn in a moment. Remember, there was a few months before the disaster. Time enough for people to forget Xenocrates' visit. Time for plans to be put into place and for a team of accomplices to secretly carry those plans out, making sabotage look like just another tragic accident. As for Carson Lusk, no matter how hard you look, you won't find any record of him after his return to Earth. Because within a year, his name has been changed. There you see? He's turning toward the camera now. Is his face familiar yet? No. Just add a few years, shorten his hair, and draw a satisfied, self-important grin. That young valet is none other than His Exalted Excellency, Robert Goddard, Overblade of North America. Holy crap. Chapter 38, A Grand Reunion of the Dubiously Deceased. The Toll and his entourage took refuge in the same caves that the Sibilants had laid claim to. Those Sibilants were now beyond repentant, prostrating themselves in his presence and professing their unworthiness to even grovel at his feet. Normally he would not accept such hyperbolic adoration, but, considering what these people had done, all the lives they had ended, groveling was a far milder punishment than they deserved. Of course the Thunderhead reminded him that punishment was not its way. Correction must be without lifting up from one's poor choices and prior deeds. As long as remorse is sincere, and one is willing to make recompense, there is no purpose to suffering. Still, Grayson didn't mind seeing them face down in bat guano. The repentant Tonus decorated a grotto as lavishly as they could for him with tapestries and pillows, and begged for ways to be of service. This place is a good place as any to wait, the Thunderhead told Grayson. Good as any, Grayson said. I realize you have no sense of smell, but the stink is terrible in here. My chemical sensors are far more accurate than the human sense of smell, the Thunderhead reminded him, and the ammonia exuded by the bat droppings is well within human tolerance. You said what it is we're waiting for? Grayson asked. A visitor, was all that Thunderhead said. Can you at least tell me who it is? Grayson asked. Nope, I cannot. This is how Grayson knew that he would be visited by a Scythe, but considering the increased hostility toward Tonists, why would the Thunderhead welcome such a visit? Maybe the sub-Saharan Scythedom had found their hiding place and was seeking justice from the Sibilants. But if so, why wouldn't the Thunderhead strongly suggest a journey as it had back at the Cloisters when Scythe Morrison was the enemy? No amount of tossing and turning the night could jog loose a hint of who it might be. Rest easy, the Thunderhead told him gently in the darkness. I am here, and no harm will come to you. Scythe Anastasia had her doubts about the so-called holy man. She needed evidence that the Thunderhead spoke to him. Not just testimony, but actual irrefutable evidence. Even as a young girl, Citra needed something to believe in it. This Toll was most likely a charismatic schemer, a con artist taking advantage of the gullible, telling them what they wanted to hear, being who they wanted him to be for his own selfish ends. She wanted to believe that. It was less disturbing than the idea of the Thunderhead choosing a Tonus as its liaison to humanity. It did make sense that the Thunderhead would keep one point of connection with humankind, but why a Tonist? Since the Thunderhead did not make mistakes, it must have a good reason, but for now she preferred to believe the Toll was a fraud. Their destination was an inhospitable sub-Saharan forest, a dense, unrelenting snarl of trees and wicked, thorny undergrowth that snagged Anastasia's new robe and pricked her through the fabric, leaving her itchy as they made their way to the cave where the toll was sequestered. As they finally neared the cave, they were accosted by Tonists standing guard. "Do not resist," said Pozuelo, but letting her guard down was not easy for Anastasia, knowing who these people were. The Tonists were unarmed, but their grips were firm. Anastasia scanned their faces. Was this the one who had thrown Ten Commandment on the ground? Was that the one who had hurled Scythe Baba onto the pyre? She could swear the faces were familiar, but it could have been her imagination. Pozuelo had insisted that they leave their weapons behind. Now she realized that it wasn't just to keep them from being confiscated, but also to stop Anastasia from giving in to her rage. Every part of her wanted to exact retribution, but she fought it. She had to keep reminding herself that true scythes, honorable scythes, never gleamed in anger. But if a single one of them raised a weapon, she would let loose, using her most deadly Bokatar moves on them, breaking their necks and spines without mercy. "We request an audience with the toll," Pozuelo said. Anastasia was about to point out that the sect was tongueless, but to her surprise, one of the Tonists responded. "The toll was elevated to a higher octave 2 years ago," one of the Tonists responded. "He is with us now only in harmony." Pozuelo was not deterred. "We have heard otherwise," he said, then added, "We are not here to glean him. We are here for our mutual benefit." The Tonist studied them for a few moments longer, serious faces dripping distrust. Then the one who first spoke said, "Come with us. He has been expecting you." Anastasia found that annoying on too many levels to count. If he was expecting them, then why did the Tonist deny he was here? And he was truly expecting them, or did this lackey just say that to make the toll seem mysterious and all-knowing? But if for even meeting him, she already detested this man behind the curtain. The Tonist led them forward, and although Anastasia didn't pull away from their grip, she gave them the opportunity to reconsider it. "You'd best let go of me if you want to keep your hands." The Tonist did not ease their grip in the least. "My hands will grow back like our tongues," one of them said. "The toll, in his wisdom, has given us back our nanites." "Good for him," Anastasia said. "At least he's not a complete imbecile." Pozuelo gave a warning glare, and Anastasia decided silence would be the best policy because nothing out of her mouth right now would benefit the situation. The procession halted at the entrance of the cave, a gaping triangular maw. It was here that they would be presented to the toll, but even before the toll arrived, the first person out of the cave made it abundantly clear to Anastasia that this ride was definitely going to be worth the price of admission. When Scythe Morrison heard that an elegy of scythes was at the cave entry, he was convinced that the North American scythedom had finally come for him. Goddard must have known he was alive, must have known that he'd been up to these past few years, and had sent his team to bring him in. He considered running, but there was only one exit from the cave. Besides, he wasn't the same man he had been when he first began this service to the toll. The junior scythe would save himself at the expense of all others, but this Scythe Morrison would face his capture bravely, defending the toll to the last, as he had promised to do. He stepped out first, as he always did, to assess the threat level and be generally intimidating, but he stopped short at the cave entrance when he saw a familiar turquoise robe, a robe he thought he'd never lay eyes on again. Scythe Anastasia was equally dumbfounded. "You?" she said. "No," Morrison blurted. "Not me. I mean, yes, it's me, but I'm not the toll. I mean..." Any hope of strong, silent intimidation was gone. Now he was little more than a stammering imbecile, which is how he always felt around Anastasia. "What are you even doing here?" she asked. He started to explain, but realized it was too long a story for the moment, and besides, he was sure her story was a better one. The other scythe in her entourage, Amazonian, by the look of his robe, chimed in several beats behind the curve. "You mean to say you two know each other?" But before either of them could answer, Mendoza came up behind Morrison, tapping him on the shoulder. "As usual, you're in the way, Morrison," he grumbled, having completely missed the conversation. Morrison stepped aside and allowed the curate to exit, and the moment Mendoza saw Anastasia, he became just as befuddled as Morrison. Although his eyes darted wildly, he managed to hold a silence. Now they stood on either side of the entrance to the cave in their usual formation. Then the toll emerged from the cave between them. He stopped short just as Morrison and Mendoza had, gaping in a way that a holy man probably never should. "Okay," said Scythe Anastasia. "Now I know I've lost my mind." Grayson knew that the Thunderhead must have been enjoying this moment immensely. He could see its cameras whirring on the back of the nearby trees, taking in everyone's expression, swiveling back and forth to see this absurd little tableau from every angle. It could have given him at least an inkling that he'd be seeing not only someone he knew, but the very individual who, in a way, was responsible for the strange path his life had taken. It couldn't have told him directly, of course, but it could have given him hints and let him deduce it for himself. But then, even with 1,000 clues, he would have marched into this encounter clueless. He resolved not to give the Thunderhead the satisfaction of seeing him bug-eyed and slack-jawed, so when Anastasia suggested that she may have lost her mind, he said as nonchalantly as he could, "Endura rises. All rejoice." "Endura didn't rise," she said. "Just me." He held his formal expression for a moment more, then couldn't maintain it. He began to grin. "So you really are alive? I wasn't sure if those broadcasts were real." "And you two know each other as well?" said the Amazonian scythe. "In a previous life," said Anastasia. Then one of her other travel companions began to laugh. Well, isn't this rich? A grand reunion of the dubiously deceased. Grayson's attention lingered. There was something engaging about her. Or him. Mendoza, trying to regain some decorum, cleared his throat, puffed up a bit, and spoke in his best stage voice. His sonority, the tunnel, welcomes you all and grants you an audience, he declared. A private audience? Grayson quietly prompted. A private audience, boomed Mendoza, but he made no move to leave. Meaning, said Grayson, just between Scythe Anastasia and me. Mendoza turned to him, his eyes panicked. I don't think that's wise. At least take Morrison with you for protection. But Morrison put his hand up in instant surrender. Leave me out of this, he said. I'm not going up against Scythe Anastasia. The Thunderhead's cameras whirred, and Grayson could swear it sounded like electronic laughter. Take the others in, Grayson said, and get them something to eat. They must be starving. He turned to the Tonists around them who had witnessed this odd but momentous reunion. All is well, he told them, then gestured to Anastasia. Walk with me. And the two of them stepped off together into the woods. Walk with me, said Anastasia when they were out of earshot. Really? Could you be any more pretentious? It's part of the act, Grayson told her. So you admit it's an act. The profit part is, but it's true that I'm not unsavory and the Thunderhead really does speak to me. He gave her a wry grin. Maybe it's my reward for saving your life that day and letting you hit me with your car. It wasn't my car, Anastasia pointed out. It was Scythe Curie's. I was just learning how to drive it. And a good thing, too. If you had a better driver and had missed me, we'd all have been incinerated, he pointed out. So does this mean that Scythe Curie is still alive, too? Anastasia's heart sank at having to speak the truth aloud. She doubted it would ever be easier. Marie died making sure I would eventually be revived. Revived, said Grayson. That explains why you don't look a day older than you did 3 years ago. She took a long look at him. He did look different, and it wasn't the outfit. His jaw seemed a little harder, his gait more confident, and his gaze so direct as to be invasive. He had learned to play this role well, just as she had learned to play hers. The last I heard you refused the offer of sanctuary I arranged for you in Amazonia, so instead you stayed with the Tonists? His gaze became even more intrusive, not judgmental, but possessing a deeper sight, a bit like the Thunderhead itself. Hiding out with the Tonists was your suggestion, or did you forget that? No, I remember, she told him, but I never thought you'd stay. I never thought you'd become their prophet. She looked over his vestments. I can't decide whether you look ridiculous or regal. Both, he told her. The trick is convincing people that strange clothing makes you something more than ordinary, but you know all about that, don't you? Anastasia had to admit he was right. The world treated you differently, defined you differently, when you wore robes or regalia. Just as long as you don't believe it yourself, she told him. When I take all this off, I'm still Grayson Tolliver, she said. And when I slip out of this robe, I'm still Citra Terra Nova. He smiled broadly at that. I never knew your given name until now. Citra. I like it. Hearing him say her name gave her a sudden wash of nostalgia, a yearning for a time for all this. There aren't many people who call me that anymore. He looked at her wistfully. Funny, but it was never easy for me to talk to you before. Now it's easier than talking with anyone else. I think we've become a lot alike in a lot of ways. She laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was true. The rest of the world saw them as symbols, intangible light to guide them through the darkness. She understood now why ancient peoples turned their heroes into constellations. You haven't told me why you wanted an audience with the Toll. Scythe Pasuelo thinks you know a safe place where Goddard won't find us, Anastasia said. Well, if the Thunderhead knows of a place like it, it hasn't told me, but then there's a lot of things it doesn't tell me. It's all right, said Anastasia. Pasuelo just wants to protect me, but I don't want to hide. What do you want? Grayson asked. What did you want? Citra Terra Nova wanted to shed her robe, seek out her family, and argue with her brother about unimportant things. But Scythe Anastasia couldn't have any of that. I want to bring down Goddard, she said. I've been able to place him on Mars at the time of the disaster, but being there doesn't prove he caused it. He survived Mars, and he survived Endora, said Grayson. Suspicious, but not incriminating. Exactly, which is why there's something else I need to find, Anastasia said. Have you heard of Scythe Alighieri? Pasuelo had to leave them that afternoon. He was called back to Amazonia by his High Blade. Tarisla gives me lots of leeway, especially when my salvage venture brought forth you, he told Anastasia. But when word got out that I had brought our artist friend to Sub-Sahara, she demanded my return lest we be accused of conspiring with Tonists. He sighed. We are a very tolerant region, but after the attack of Ten Commandments Palace, even with the most accepting regions are cooling to Tonists, and our Harblade does not want bad publicity. Several Tonists passed in the cavern behind them. They bowed reverently, saying, Your honors. Some of their voices still a little slurred, as it was the first week with their new tongues. It was hard to believe that these were the same violent, crazed sibilants who had murdered Tenkamminen. Grayson, the Toll that is, had turned them and brought them back from their awful edge of their own humanity. Anastasia could not forgive them, but she found an ability to coexist with them. People are vessels, Jerry had told her. They hold whatever's poured into them, and apparently Grayson had drained them and refilled them with something far more palatable. Pasuelo said his goodbye at the entrance to the cave. This place is isolated, and if the Toll truly is under the protection of the Thunderhead, you'll be safe with him, he told her. It's not exactly the sanctuary I was looking for, but who knows if this place even exists. Rumors aren't worth the air they're whispered on. I'm hoping the Toll will help me find Alighieri. I doubt he even exists anymore, Pasuelo lamented. He was ancient when I was an apprentice, and I am, as you say, no spring chicken. He laughed and embraced her. It felt comforting, fatherly. Until she was in his embrace, she hadn't realized how much she missed that. It made her think of her family once more. She had not tried to contact them since her revival, as Pasuelo had advised her against it. They were safe and protected in a friendly region, he had assured her. Perhaps there would come a time for that reunion. Or perhaps she'd never see them again. Either way, there was still too much to be done for her to even think about it. Say goodbye to Captain Soberanis for me, Pasuelo said. I take it Jericho is staying on. As you ordered, Anastasia said. Pasuelo raised an eyebrow. I never gave such an order, he said. Jericho does as Jericho pleases. That's the good captain has forsaken the sea and has chosen to be a protector says a lot about both of you. He embraced her one final time. Take care, mio ano. Then he turned and strode towards his transport that waited in a clearing. Ezra, the artist, who Pasuelo saw fit to set free, took to painting a mural to fill one of the larger caverns. It tickled him that this could become a pilgrimage destination for future Tonists, if indeed there would be any future Tonists, and that his cave paintings might be endlessly analyzed by the scholars of tomorrow. He introduced some odd elements just to confuse them. A dancing bear, a 5-eyed boy, and an 11-hour clock missing the number 4. What's life if you can't mess with the future, he said. He asked the Toll if he remembered him, and Grayson told him that he did. It was a half-truth. Grayson remembered Ezra's audience with him because it had been a turning point for Grayson as well. The first time he gave advice rather than just being a mouthpiece for the Thunderhead. But he had no memory at all of Ezra's face. Ah, the wonderful limitations of the biological brain, the Thunderhead said wistfully. The remarkable ability to dispense with the unnecessary rather than filing every little thing into cumbersome compendium. The Thunderhead called humanity's selective memory the gift of forgetting. There were many things Grayson had forgotten that he wished he could remember. Most of his childhood, any warm moments with his parents. And there were things he remembered that he wished he could forget, like the looks on Purity's face when Scythe Constantine gleaned her. He knew the gift of forgetting was now a bane to Anastasia because the world seems to have forgotten Scythe Alighieri. But the Thunderhead hadn't. Alighieri was there in its cumbersome compendium of human history. Getting to that information was the problem. The Thunderhead had been silent for his entire conversation with Anastasia. Then, after she had retired to the cave to join her comrades, it finally spoke up. I cannot in any way help Anastasia find the man she's looking for. But you do know where he can be found, don't you? I do, but it would be a violation for me to communicate his location to her. Can you tell me? I could, said the Thunderhead, but if you then to tell her, I will be forced to mark you unsavory. And then, where would we be? Grayson sighed. There must be a workaround. Perhaps, said the Thunderhead, but I can't help you find it. Workarounds. The Thunderhead had used them as one back when he was a naive Nimbus Academy student. And come to think of it, he remembered learning about an official workaround in one of his early classes at the Academy, before he got himself expelled. There was a sort of ritualistic practice that allowed a Nimbus agent to speak with the Scythe without breaking the law. A trilogue, it was called. It involved a professional go-between who was well-versed in the Scythe state protocols, who could and could not be said. What they needed, Grayson realized, was a go-between. In his private cavern, spread with rugs and hung with tapestries, the Toll sat on one of the many pillows strewn over the place facing Jericho Soberanis. Grayson estimated he and Soberanis were roughly the same age, that is, unless the salvage captain had turned a corner, but Grayson didn't think so. The young captain didn't seem to be the type who would set back so far. Still, there was something noble there, not so much wisdom, but worldliness. Grayson had been all over the world, yet saw so little of it in his protective cocoon he felt like he'd be nowhere at all. But Jericho Soberanis had truly seen the world, and what was more, knew the world. It was something to be admired. Scythe Anastasia explained why you called for me, Soberanis said. How will this work, your... what is it that they call you? Your sonority, Grayson said. That's right, your sonority, Soberanis said with a smirk. You think it's funny? The smirk didn't leave the salvage captain's face. Did you come up with that? No, my chief curate did. He ought to be in advertising. He was. The conversation lagged. Not surprising. This was entirely artificial and forced, but it needed to happen. Say something, Grayson told the salvage captain. What sort of thing should I say? It doesn't matter what you talk about. We just need to have a conversation. Then I'll pose questions to the Thunderhead about the conversation, and it will answer. Jericho smiled again, mischievous, alluring in an odd sort of way. A game of chess, then, where all the pieces are invisible. If you like, said Grayson. Very well. Jericho took a moment to consider their subject matter, then said something Grayson was not expecting. You and I have something in common. What would that be? We both sacrificed our lives to save Scythe Anastasia. Grayson shrugged. It was only temporary. Still, said Soberanis, it takes courage and a remarkable leap of faith to do so. Not really. People splat every day. Yes, but neither of us are that sort. To render ourselves deadish goes against our basic natures. Not everyone would have made the choice we made. This is how I know that you are much more the outfit than you wear. Soberanis smiled again. This time it was genuine, honest. Grayson had never met someone with such a wide variety of smiles. Each one spoke volumes. Thank you, said Grayson. I suppose our mutual admiration of Scythe Anastasia does bond us in a way. He waited to see if the Thunderhead would say anything at all, but it didn't. It was waiting to be asked. Grayson still didn't know what to ask it. I hope this isn't insulting, Grayson said, but I'm not sure how I should address you, as Mr. or Miss Soberanis. Salvage Captain glanced around the cavern and became noticeably uncomfortable. I'm at a bit of a loss. I very rarely find myself in a place where I can't see the sky. Why should that matter? I suppose it shouldn't. I'm always outdoors or intentionally near a window or skylight, but here in a cave... Grayson still didn't understand, and the captain became just the tiniest bit miffed. I will never understand how you binaries are so attached to your birth plumbing. Why should it matter whether a person has ovaries or testicles or both? It doesn't, Grayson said, feeling a little bit flustered. I mean, it does matter for some things, doesn't it? You tell me. Grayson found he couldn't look away from that gaze. Maybe it doesn't matter as much as I thought? He hadn't meant to pose it as a question, but it made no difference because Jericho was not giving him an answer. Why don't you call me Jerry, and we don't have to worry about the technicalities? All right, Jerry it is. Let's begin. I thought we already had. Is it my move? Jerry feigned moving an imaginary chess piece forward and then said, I very much like your eyes. I see how you can persuade people to follow you. I don't think my eyes have anything to do with that. You'd be surprised. Grayson pressed his earpiece deeper in his ear. Thunderhead, do my eyes influence people to follow me? Yes, on occasion, the Thunderhead responded. They can be helpful when all else fails. Grayson found himself blushing in spite of himself. Jerry read it and offered a now variation on that grin. So the Thunderhead agrees with me. Maybe. Grayson had entered this whole thing assuming he would be in control of the conversation, but clearly he was not. And yet, he was beginning to grin as well. He was sure, though, that he only had one grin, and it looked profoundly stupid. Tell me about Madagascar, he asked, shifting the focus away from himself. Jerry's demeanor immediately changed with thoughts of home. My region is beautiful. The mountains, the beaches, the forests. The people are kind, gentle and accepting. You should see Antananarivo, our capital city, and the way the sun hits the hills at sunset. Thunderhead, said Grayson, tell me something interesting about Antananarivo. Thunderhead spoke, and Grayson listened. What did it say? Jerry asked. It told me the tallest building in Antananarivo is 309.67 meters high, and is exactly the same height as 4 other buildings in the world, down to the millimeter. Jerry leaned back unimpressed. Is that the most interesting fact that it could find? What about the Jakarta trees and around the Lake Enosi and the royal tombs? But Grayson put up his hand to stop Jerry and thought for a moment. The Thunderhead never said anything without reason. The trick was to read its mind. Thunderhead, where are those other 4 buildings? I'm curious. One in the Chile Argentine region, it told him. Another in Britannia, the third in Arabia, and the fourth in the region of New Zealand. Grayson told Jerry, who was still unimpressed. I've been to all those regions, but home is always the best, I suppose. Have you been to every region of the world? Grayson asked. All the ones with a coast, Jerry said. I have an aversion to landlocked places. Then the Thunderhead offered a simple, obvious opinion, which Grayson shared. The Thunderhead says you'd probably be most at home in regions that feature an island or archipelago roughly the size of Madagascar. Grayson turned his head a bit, a habit he had when speaking to the Thunderhead in the presence of others. Thunderhead, what regions might that be? But the Thunderhead was silent. Grayson grinned. Nothing. Which means we're onto something. The ones I can think of off the top of my head, said Jerry, are Britannia, Caribia, the region of the rising sun, New Zealand, and the Nessias. Interesting, said Grayson. What? Britannia and New Zealand have come up twice. To the Thunderhead was once more silent. I'm beginning to like this game, Jerry said. Grayson couldn't deny that he was, too. What region would you like to live in, Jerry asked, if you had to choose of any place in the world? It was a loaded question, and perhaps Jerry knew that, because everyone else in the world did have that choice. Anyone could live anywhere. But for Grayson, it was less of an actual place than a state of mind. I'd want to live in a place where nobody knows me, he told Jerry. But nobody does know you, Jerry said. You know the toll, but not you. Take me, for instance. I don't even know your name. It's Grayson. Jerry smiled with the warmth of the Madagascan sun. Hello, Grayson. That simple greeting seemed to both melt him and freeze him at once. Madagascans were known to be charming. Perhaps that's all it was, or perhaps not. He'd realize he'd have to unpack it later. For me, I never want you to be far from the sea, Jerry said. Thunderhead, said Grayson. What are your thoughts on that? And the Thunderhead said, There's a city or town in every region that is the farthest from the sea. I assume the captain would not care to live in any of those places. But, said Grayson, if they had Jacaranda trees like that of the Madagascan lake, maybe Jerry might feel at home. Perhaps, said the Thunderhead. And then Grayson made a stealth move, the kind that move that one's opponent wouldn't see coming. But of course the Thunderhead did. In fact, the Thunderhead welcomed it. Tell me, Thunderhead, what are some of the regions where Jacarandas grow? Although they do best in the warmer climates, they grow in almost every region now, the Thunderhead told him. Their purple blooms are appreciated around the world. Yes, said Grayson, but can you give me a list of, say, 4 places where they can be found? Of course, Grayson. Jacaranda trees can be found in West America, Isthmus, Lower Himalaya, and even in the botanical gardens of Britannia. Jerry studied him. What is it? What did the Thunderhead say? Check and mate, Grayson said, and Jerry gave his stupidest grin. We're looking for a town in the Britannia region that's farthest from the sea. That's where we'll find Scythe Alighieri, Grayson told Anastasia. Are you sure? Positive, said Grayson. Probably, he corrected. Maybe. Anastasia considered it, but then returned her gaze to Grayson. You said we. Grayson nodded. I'm going with you. It was the most spontaneous decision Grayson had made in years. It felt good. More than good, it felt freeing. Grayson, I'm not sure that's a good idea, Anastasia said, but he would not be deterred. I'm the toll, and the toll goes where he pleases, Grayson said. Besides, I want to be there when the Scythe Anastasia changes the world. The Thunderhead said nothing either way. It didn't influence him against it. It didn't suggest that it was the right thing to do. Or perhaps it wasn't commenting because it involved a scythe. It was only when Grayson was alone again that the Thunderhead spoke to him. It wasn't about their destination, however. The conversation took an entirely different direction. I sensed a change in your physiology as you spoke to the salvage captain, the Thunderhead said. Why is that your business? Grayson snapped. It's just an observation, the Thunderhead said calmly. With all your years of studying human nature, don't you know when you're intruding into my privacy? I do know, said the Thunderhead, and I also know when you want the privacy intruded upon. As always, the Thunderhead was right, and it tricked Grayson off. He wanted to talk about it, to process it, but of course there was no one he could talk to but the Thunderhead. I believe she had an effect on you, it said. She? Isn't it presumptuous of you to call Jerry she? Not at all. The sky above the cave is clear and full of stars. Then the Thunderhead explained to Grayson how Jerry saw gender, a thing as varied as the wind and ephemeral as the clouds. That's poetic, said Grayson, but impractical. Who are we to judge such things? The Thunderhead said. And besides, the human heart is rarely practical. Now that sounds judgmental. Quite the opposite, said the Thunderhead. I long for the luxury of being impractical. It would add texture to my existence. It was only later, after Grayson had taken his earpiece out and he was laying in bed, that it occurred to him why his conversation with Jerry Soberanis felt so inviting and unsettling at the same time. Hello, Grayson, Jerry had said. Nothing strange about that, except it echoed something deeper. They were the same words, the same tone of the voice the Thunderhead had used the moment it began speaking to him again. And that is the end of chapter 38. That was quite a long one. Probably the longest chapter in the book we've come across so far, because that was a 26-minute episode for one chapter. But thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. We finally broke 1,000 subs, which is fantastic. So we will be doing a best of 1,000 special relatively soon here, guys. I just got to edit it, and we all know how good I am at that and sticking to schedules. Conversational topic of the day would be... I'm trying to think of one I haven't already asked. Who's your favorite superhero? It could be DC, it can be Marvel, it can be one of the lesser-known brands, but who's your favorite superhero? Thank you all so much for the support. I will catch you in the next one. Stay freaky.